Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me for one of my regular media availabilities. When we scheduled this earlier in the week, I'm not sure I was as optimistic that we would actually have some good news, although the good news comes with a big asterisk, and that is we are in the final hours of finishing an agreement to avoid what I call stupidity on steroids, which would have been violating and going through the debt ceiling. And the ramifications of that would have been maybe one of the stupidest things that could have ever happened in my whole tenure in Washington. And that is saying something, because there's been plenty of other stupid things that have happened over the years. But we were approaching on October 18th, where if we had not reached political agreement, we would have violated the full faith and credit of the United States. What that would have done to every Virginian, every American, it would have driven up the cost of interest rates, which would have been then reflected in people's credit card bills going up, their mortgages going up. It would have meant that potentially Social Security checks wouldn't have gone out, our military wouldn't have been paid. And from a plain fiscal standpoint, if interest rates had simply gone up 1 point, it would have increased the cost to the government $200 billion a year in terms of added interest cost on our now $27 trillion plus, almost $28 billion plus debt. That would have been completely crazy on an economic basis. It would have also sent shockwaves around the world in terms of how America is viewed. We know we've got challenges coming out of Afghanistan. We know the Communist Party in China, their military is flying jets invading the space on Taiwan. That is another national security issue we have to deal with. The idea that we would have self-inflicted this kind of damage to our country would have been crazy. Now, I don't want to say we hit a home run, because we've simply delayed this decision until December 3rd. It appears there will be a bipartisan agreement to increase the debt ceiling by about $480 billion over these next couple of months. And again, let me be clear when I say this, the debt ceiling is all about paying off bills that have already been incurred. This is not about authorization of new spending. This is about simply honoring the commitment that the Congress and President has made and oftentimes already spent dollars into the economy, simply paying off that credit card bill. I hope one of the things that will come out of this is that we might all take a deep breath and realize we're the only industrial country in the world that has this kind of crazy process. If you don't like government spending, don't hire members of Congress who pass appropriations bills. That is the process we have in terms of spending. Having this arbitrary political tool out there that allows extremists on either end of the political spectrum, like giving them a live hand grenade and having them pull the pin to kind of self-inflict damage, is crazy. I would hope we would take this moment and frankly remove the debt ceiling political tool for all future administrations, Democrat or Republican. So we've got that behind us, number one. Hopefully later today or tomorrow we'll see the vote on that. It will allow us to, as the Democrats, to go back and continue to work on, one, getting the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, record investments, something I was proud to be one of the main negotiators on. We need to get that passed sooner rather than later. And then come back to the so-called Build Back Better program, where we will debate issues like child care, like paid family medical leave, like lowering the price of prescription drugs, and frankly making our tax code fairer. I've still been a business guy longer than I've been an elected official. I know we need to keep our businesses competitive, but coming on the heels of the tax cuts in 2017, it is just wrong when we've got companies that are showing literally tens of billions of dollars of profits each year and they pay no taxes, or to see some of the most successful in our country pay no taxes. We need a fairer tax code, and that's what we're trying to do in this Build Back Better agenda. Let me make one other comment, and then I don't want to keep talking on the front end. We'll go to questions. And this is on a subject that was of enormous interest in Charlottesville. It's also growing to be a problem now in Richmond and unfortunately around the Commonwealth, and that is the slowness of delivery of mail. In many communities, we're seeing mail delivery that used to take place every day, folks only getting their mail once or twice a week, sometimes not getting drugs that were needed, not having bills paid in an appropriate time because you put it in the mail and it doesn't get delivered. This has shown some of the macro problems we've got on hiring enough people to work in the post office. In Charlottesville last weekend, they brought in 55 additional carriers on Saturday, 63 additional carriers on Sunday. We got some relief for part of the community, but this problem that has been, frankly, all over the Commonwealth, but particularly centered in Charlottesville, is something I think I'm going to have to revisit. I saw this in Richmond. It's going to take more focus from my office and others on the Richmond circumstance. I know there were some problems down in, I believe, in Chesapeake. There were some problems around Fredericksburg on this issue of slowness of mail delivery. It is part of the problems that have come, I think, when during Donald Trump there was a political appointee put in as Postmaster General, Mr. DeJoy, who came in and frankly made dramatic changes to the Postal Service in the midst of COVID, in the midst of a national election, changes that he had to walk back, but we're still paying the price of some of that disruption. And it's my hope is that the Postal Board, that now has a majority Biden appointees, will look at the top level management of the post office, including the Postmaster General, to make sure that we can bring more efficiency. I've got to grapple with that now at the ground level in individual districts and regions around the Commonwealth, and something that, again, was accentuated in Charlottesville, but unfortunately I think is starting to be a problem around the whole Commonwealth. With that, why don't I go ahead and, Lauren, go back to you, and let's start taking some questions. Laura, can you hear me?
Hi, Senator Warner. Thanks for taking our questions. I know we've got elections coming up.
Yeah,
But historically, non-presidential elections don't receive as large of a voter turnout. Why is it especially important this year to get out and vote, and what are some of the more important issues that Virginians could or should consider this time around?
Well, you're right. In gubernatorial elections, particularly after as hot and contested a presidential election as we had in 2020, I know a lot of Virginians are tired, at least in terms of grappling with politics. And we all know in Virginia there is no rest for the weary. We have an election, every year, state elections in the off years, federal elections in the even years. The good news is for people, the General Assembly has made voting easier than ever in Virginia. We are in the early vote period. I've already voted. There's voting availability on Saturdays and now starting on Sundays, a couple of the Sundays on a going forward basis. So we've made this process easier. One of the concerns I have about the slowness of the mail delivery is there's an awful lot of absentee ballots that have been mailed out. I want to make sure people, if you got that ballot, mail it in as soon as possible, or if you can go ahead and vote in person, even if you've got that absentee ballot, you can do that, please do. Because the issues are extraordinarily important. I think Virginia, which we saw over the last couple of years, has received recognition as being one of the best managed states in the country, something I was proud to have as well when I was governor. But Virginia, under Democratic leadership, has been independently viewed as the best managed state in the country. We ought to continue that. We've seen progress made on issues like elections. If we turn the keys over to somebody in terms of the Republican candidate for governor right now who's embracing the Trump big lie about election returns and election audits he's called for, that is right out of the Donald Trump playbook. We had fair elections in Virginia. People who've been involved in the political process for a long time like me know that. I would be very afraid if we changed directions in the governor's office or the House of Delegates. You could see the kind of restrictive voting laws that have been passed in Georgia and Texas creep into Virginia. We see as coming out of Texas right now, enormous restrictions on a woman's right to choose. If we make choices in Virginia, you've seen the Republican candidate talk about restricting women's rights to choose, another important issue. I think as well, we've made Virginia welcoming to all people, and that I think has increased the interest of the business community to locate in Virginia. We've obviously been successful with Amazon. We've been successful with Nestle's bringing their North American corporate headquarters here. We've had a number of new business announcements in Southside and Southwest Virginia. We are on a bit of a roll. If Virginia suddenly veers off to the right, veers off into the kind of Trumpian approach, that's not good for business. That's not good in terms of attracting additional employers. So I hope Virginians will get out and vote. There's a lot at stake. You can vote early. I hope you will go out and vote early. Make sure your voice is heard.
We're going to go to Bill Atkinson with USA Today now.
Good morning. I apologize. I'm hearing feedback, and I hope it's not coming from my end. But I just want to say, the Associated Press reported 2 days ago that funding for HBCUs has fallen from $45 billion to $2 billion under the newest spending plan, and it was insinuated that severe drop was a result of party infighting. Many in the HBCU community are seeing that as another example of false promises made to the black colleges over the years. I know over on the House of Representatives, Congressman Scott is pushing for that. The question I have for you is, do you see this eventually being rectified and the $45 billion, or at least close to it, being restored before the final plan clears Congress?
Let me first of all say I'm a huge supporter of our HBCUs. I was a board member of Virginia Union. I know what kind of quality students come out of our HBCUs. Matter of fact, I set up something close to 25 years ago called the Virginia High Tech Partnership, where we got students from, we then had 5 HBCUs in Virginia, we're down to 4, where those students got high-tech internships. And I have always supported HBCUs as both governor and as senator. Matter of fact, last year was part of the group, bipartisan group, that made sure we evened up and put in additional funding for HBCUs. I would point out that in all of the COVID relief bills, there were separate funds set aside for HBCUs. So if you look, and I give credit, this both under President Trump and under President Biden, HBCUs received a record amount of funding in this last couple years since COVID came. How much the HBCUs get versus the request, I think we will do better than the House, but clearly the original proposal that there was going to be $3.5 trillion of spending, and let's make clear that top line number is over 10 years, but it's going to be cut back dramatically. It appears that the number will be closer to the $2 trillion number. I'm thinking it'll probably end up around 2.1. And then the real question is not the top line number as much as what goes into that. HBCUs should receive additional funding out of this program, but we also need to, where I think we need to focus on is how do we lower the price of prescription drugs? How do we make sure that child care becomes more affordable and more available around all of the Commonwealth? How do we make sure an issue like paid family medical leave actually takes place? How do we make sure there's more affordable housing? We've got a housing crisis in the Commonwealth and in the country. And I wish my Republican friends would be working with us on this kind of initiative. It appears they don't, but I think we will get this done, and HBCUs will be part of that package.
Okay, we're going to move on to Brendan King from WCG Funding.
Senator Warner, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Oh, forgive me. I apologize. So I'm working on a story about overseas cyber criminals targeting the unemployment systems, like the Virginia Employment Commission. Just spoke to a security expert. He says these scammers are setting up fake job listings. They're using the ID.me verification system. They're verifying that Virginians are who they are and then using their identities to apply for unemployment. My question is, are states like Virginia equipped to tackle these overseas criminals, or do you think the federal government needs to step in and help out?
Clearly, we've had some challenges at VEC over the last 18 plus months during COVID. We've also seen that not only is the VEC's computer equipment old, this is a problem all across the whole country. Matter of fact, I know there was a lot of debate early on in COVID, why was there a $600 a week plus up? Why wasn't this more tailored to somebody who lost their job, giving them some level of salary replacement? Why wasn't there more flexibility? The reason was, both at the Federal Department of Labor and at state unemployment commissions all over the country, our technology is way outdated. And one of the things that, frankly, we didn't do enough of in the COVID CARES relief package is upgrade technology, number one. Number two, this idea of cyber criminals impersonating Virginians, this is not a Virginia-centric problem. The number of states that is experiencing this issue is huge. We have seen enormous amounts of fraud. Oftentimes, these scammers, cyber scammers, setting up, as you mentioned, in foreign nations, coming in and frankly, breaking in to our systems or representing as Virginians and getting checks sent out to that end up in the hands of foreign cyber criminals. This is a huge issue. And one of the things that's remarkable is there is not even a requirement at this moment in time that a state unemployment commission, or for that matter, even a federal agency, if they are hacked into, actually have to report that hacking to CISA, which is the Department of Homeland Security Cyber Center that's supposed to take care of domestic cyber incidents. So one of the things I've been working on for a couple of years, sitting from the Intelligence Committee, but now have broad bipartisan legislation that I believe will ultimately be added to the Defense Authorization Bill, and we are working with partners who've got a similar bill, bipartisan, to mandate that there is this reporting of these incidents. You talk about the federal government stepping in. The federal government can step in terms of helping with additional resources, making sure if there's a break-in in Virginia, we would notify other states of the type of break-in so they can be better protected. But that's got to start with an obligation to report. And I'm very confident that we will see this at least first step to make sure that the VECs and the others report these cyber incidents so that law enforcement and cybersecurity professionals across state governments and federal governments can actually act to prevent this. It also begs the bigger question, though, of we have for a long time, and one of the things, candidly, we should have done more on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Our technology systems inside government is part of infrastructure. And candidly, we have not made the kind of investments that we should. If we had invested, if you can see Amazon change their prices on a minute-by-minute basis, shouldn't our computer systems, one, have a little bit of security and have a little bit of flexibility to reimburse folks, at different levels of income, different amounts of money? So far, we've not been able to do that. But I do think the cyber incident reporting will be a step in the right direction on, clamping down on this kind of cyber attack in unemployment systems and across other government agencies. We're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it across government agencies. We're seeing it across healthcare systems. This is a problem that I think the SolarWinds hack that got into 18,000 companies, or the Colonial Pipeline hack that ended up having many of our gas stations in Virginia closed down for a number of days, I think brought that to folks' attention. We've got to act on this now, and again, the good news is I do think we will get the cyber reporting bill become part of the law of the land, before Thanksgiving.
Joe?
Yes.
Perfect. Joe Thomas from WCHV.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it. I wanted to ask about Build Back Better, and I was told that it could pass on reconciliation, but it would require specifics to be listed on all segments of Build Back Better, and that's why there is no press to get it passed on reconciliation. And in paying for it, you talk about the profits on these corporations. Corporations aren't really the ones paying that, aren't they? Aren't they the investors that pay taxes on those profits?
Well, let me clarify a couple things, Joe. One, I think your questions about reconciliation, in terms of specific amounts and so forth, we were reluctant to put the debt ceiling extension into reconciliation. In terms of the Build Back Better, the only way that's going to pass will be through reconciliation, and we have to be very specific. What you're going to spend the money for, what kind of program, what kind of project, and also how you're going to raise it. And one of the things that we've committed, unlike my Republican friends, when they, basically cut taxes by over $2 trillion back in 2017, they didn't pay for any of that. So, they used the magic dust of dynamic scoring, which, again, both sides have used a little bit, but they used it fairly excessively. What we are saying is, if we're going to spend a couple $1 trillion over the next 10 years on things like lowering prescription drug prices, providing better child care, trying to make sure that we've got paid family medical leave, we're going to pay for it. I think that's the fiscally responsible thing to do. And the semantics debate about when you tax a business, a corporation, who pays? I mean, under your argument, Joe, you wouldn't tax businesses at all, and I don't think that's fair. There's no other industrial country in the world that doesn't tax corporations. We have now, in effect, the lowest corporate tax rate in the world. We have even lower for international or for American companies that do business abroad. We still have in the tax code enormous incentives for companies to build factories overseas. I mean, if an American company builds a factory in Germany, they spend a couple $1 million on that factory, they get a guaranteed 10% return for literally the life of the factory. That's close to 40 years. That's not fair to a small business in Albemarle County if they're competing against some multi-international company that's getting a guaranteed 10% return because of a tax code that was flawed. So I absolutely believe that we need to work on an international basis and put a minimum corporate tax in place so that we don't have companies like the Facebooks of the world, and others putting their intellectual property in some low tax regime and then building factories in higher tax regimes like Germany. That's not fair to American small business. And I think also, we ought to not be the highest in the world, but we sure as heck ought to not be the lowest and have a tax code that is so full of tax exemptions and tax breaks that some of the most prominent companies in the world show their shareholders record profits and pay zero taxes. That's not fair. That's not fair to individuals who pay their taxes. That's not fair to small businesses that pay their taxes. And what I'm about is trying to make our tax code fairer, but also making sure we generate the level of revenues that we need to pay our bills. Because frankly, passing on this 28 soon to be $29 trillion debt to our kids is not very responsible.
I'm sorry, Mark. I want to clarify just real quick. I meant companies certainly pay taxes on their revenues, but it's the profits that the president mentioned and then you mentioned as well. Those taxes are usually paid for by the investors who get those profits. That's all I was asking.
No, Joe. I was going to any of our. Here's one of the things we're wrestling with. Our tax code. the amount of taxes that you pay is based against your profits. I mean, if you make $100,000, but you spend $99,000 to get that, your income is only $1,000. So that's the only taxable income you have. The challenge is we've got some big companies that take advantage of so much of our tax code that they show to their shareholders huge amounts of profits, but show to the IRS no profits, because I don't want to get too much in the weeds. There's tax accounting, and then there's what's called general accounting principles, GAAP accounting. One of the things that we're thinking about is to put a minimum tax around 7%, much lower, that would actually be a fallback, so that if you've got an Amazon that shows they're making, billions and billions of dollars in profits but show no tax liability, that there ought to be at least some minimum tax liability. I think that is a fair approach. It is problematic because you're mixing, GAAP accounting versus tax accounting, and Rachel's given me the evil eye not to get into the weeds on this stuff. I'd be happy to get with, if we ever want to do kind of a tax-only media availability, I'm happy to get into the weeds. But I do think there is this basic fairness argument that I hear from, Joe, I hear from conservatives, liberals, and everybody in between, that one of the frustrations, I think, is they see some of the wealthiest of our folks, and I'm all for people being successful. Listen, I've been lucky to be successful, but some of our most successful people, most successful companies, contributing nothing to the operation of our federal government, whereas people who are making that $50, $60, $70, $80, $100,000 a year, they don't have the same kind of tax breaks. They're paying their taxes on an individual basis, or as a small business, they're paying taxes. I just think there ought to be a little bit more fairness.
We're going to go to a question submitted by Dory Zook from WINA. Her question is the following. Following Glenn Youngkin's call for an election audit and President Trump's repeated claims of voter fraud and election fraud, do you have anything to say about the obvious push from the right to cast doubt on elections?
I think it is extraordinarily dangerous to spread the big lie about the integrity of our voting system. I've run a lot of elections in Virginia. I've not won all of them. I lost my first election. But I absolutely trust the integrity of our voting system. You undermine the very principles of democracy if you suddenly say every loser gets to say, well, I only lost because the election system was crooked. That's the kind of mindset that takes place in Russia. It's the kind of mindset that takes place by the Communist Party in China. It's the kind of mindset that takes place in a country like Belarus or certain countries in South America and Africa, where there is constant interference in the electoral system. And any leader or aspiring leader that makes these kind of false claims and without any evidence at all, if somebody wants to bring forward evidence of inappropriate or bad counting in a Virginia election system, bring forward that evidence. But don't make these kind of false claims that frankly undermine democracy. I think it is the height of irresponsibility.
Thank everyone for calling in today. That was our final question.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.